Hey guys, welcome back to the Avenger holster tutorial. In the last video, we went over how to make a template for virtually any style of handgun. In this video, we'll be going over how to cut out the leather, bevel it, sand the edges, and prep it for stitching. Then we're gonna go ahead and stitch it up, and it'll be all set for the wet forming in the next video after this. So let's get to it. I like to use a 7/8 ounce leather. It's a vegetable tanned full grain leather. I have two pieces cut out that'll just about fit the size of the template. For tracing these holsters, I like to use a red speedball pen. It's extra fine tip. You can see it really easily. Don't worry about the line, you'll be able to sand it off afterwards. All right, before you move the template, we're gonna go ahead and mark the stitch line with the pricking awl. All right, before we go ahead and cut the leather, we're gonna take the reinforcement template and put it on top of the leather. And we're gonna go ahead and poke the outline of this template onto the leather. But let's stay inside of the edge by about 1/8 of an inch. This works as a guide to let us know where to sand and glue when we place the reinforcement later. Okay, we're gonna stop there. We don't want to go too far up the edge here. Actually, we don't wanna do any marks on this top edge. All right, we're ready to go ahead and cut out the leather. I like to use a really sharp pair of serrated scissors. These scissors have a very fine serration on the bottom edge. This helps grip the leather so it won't slip constantly. There's a lot of different types of scissors out there meant for cutting leather. This is the only one that really works well. You have to get the mini serration on the bottom edge. Now, if you're having trouble cutting out the leather, if it feels like it's a little too tough to cut with the scissors, one trick you can use is to take a sponge and just go over the leather, dampen it a little bit, let it sit for about 2 minutes, and then start cutting again with the scissors. Try to cut right on that red line or just barely on the inside edge of it. If you don't get it perfectly, especially around these tight corners, that's fine. We're gonna bevel these edges later and it'll end up getting sanded off or beveled off. For long straight edges, I like to use a rolling blade. There are different, like you can use a head knife too, but that takes a lot of skill. And personally, I feel they're kind of dangerous, especially when this thing works so well with a ruler in place too. Great thing about these serrated blades is you can really get a nice corner. Now we need to punch out this belt slot right here. And I'm gonna use a 5/16 inch hole punch and a box cutter to help cut out that hole. When you're cutting out the belt slot with a box cutter, don't complete the cut into the next hole. Stop short of it about 1/8 of an inch. Then we're gonna go back and we're gonna complete the cut by turning it around and connecting your cut. That way you don't cut through and into an area where you don't want to be slicing into. All right, now we need to mark the glue line on the flesh side of the leather. So grab your template and flip the leather piece over. Now your template should have holes pricked along that stitch line already. This will allow your pen to go through the paper and onto the leather. All right, kind of sketch that in. All right. Now let's cut out the reinforcement piece. Actually, we do need to mark these 2 lines that'll help us with stitching later. So we're gonna go ahead and poke holes here along this line, stopping there, and down here as well. And that's it. Before we bevel the edges of this piece, it makes sense to actually mark the stitch line with this tool. Having a sharper edge allows it to hold onto the edge a little bit better. So let's go ahead and wet this piece. Just dampen the surface slightly. Just like that. And take this tool, starting here. Let's punch out that belt slot. All right, now we're ready to bevel a few edges on the reinforcement piece. I'm gonna re-wet the edges just very lightly. We're not gonna bevel this side just yet. We will get that belt slot. We're also gonna do the back side of the belt slot and the area where the belt will be passing through the leather. When beveling, I like to use a simple leather glove because this tool tends to slip every once in a while, and while it's fairly safe to use, for some reason it tends to catch your fingernail just when you don't want it to. All right, to bevel belt slots, you might find that the typical bevel tool, a number 2, is going to be a little bit too awkward to get on these inside curves. There's another type of beveler you can use that's meant to get into really tight spaces. This one's made by Barry King, and it has kind of a curved, fully curved front tip. On the main body, we're going to go ahead and bevel this bottom edge, little section right up to where the reinforcement place is going to be glued, both sides. Same with the back, up to the stitch line, just like that. We're not bothering to bevel the rest of this template because after we glue the reinforcement piece, we will need to sand this edge anyways to straighten it up. And then when we go to glue the entire piece like this, again, we have to sand this edge, so there's no point in beveling it. Next, we're gonna go ahead and prep the area to glue the reinforcement piece on. So I have a very rough grit sandpaper. What I like to do is, especially along this top edge, rough it up. And on the inside here, I just do a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just stay inside those poked holes that you made before. I like to use white PVA glue to glue leather together. That has basically no smell. It's supposedly non-toxic, and it's perfectly strong for holding leather in place while you stitch. You don't need much. Just make sure to get it well on that top edge here. And I just put a little bit around the area like that. I have a silicone brush here just to help spread it right to the edge. It's not really the glue that holds your holster together. You're just gluing the leather in place so that you can stitch it. It's the stitching that does all the work. Make sure to line up that top edge. Press it down. If you have a smooth-faced hammer, you can go ahead and knock the edges around the entire edge of the reinforcement piece. All right, to stitch the reinforcement piece onto the body of the holster, you have two methods. You can use the hand stitch method, which I have a link to on this page, or you can use a heavy duty cylinder arm sewing machine, and it makes quick work of it. So I highly recommend, if you're gonna get into this line of work, you invest in a cylinder arm sewing machine. If you're gonna do your stitching on a machine, I like to use a size 277 thread on the top and bottom. So when you get to this part, we're gonna go ahead and follow into the previously stitched holes until this point. And then we're gonna go ahead and make a second layer of stitches just on the outside of this point, just to here. All right, at this stage, I like to put on the maker's mark before I forget. We're gonna wet this area right here. Next, we're gonna sand the edge of the area that we just glued together. You can use the old school method where you take a rough grit sandpaper and you sand along the edge to get the shape you want. Then you work your way down to finer and finer grits so that you have a nice smooth edge. In my shop, I like to use a drum roll sander, and I use a very small diameter sanding roll on it. This makes really quick work of it. Okay, now that we have the edge sanded up, we're gonna go ahead and bevel it, and then we're gonna use a stitch wheel on the back side of the stitches to press them into the leather. This helps sink them a bit and makes them a little more durable over time, so there's less abrasion happening with the weapon. I'm gonna lightly dampen this top edge, and same with the back. Go ahead and dampen the backside of your stitches. We're gonna use the stitch wheel. It's a number 6 because we stitched at 6 stitches per inch, so this should fit in each hole. Use medium to firm pressure on this. It's not perfect, but it helps a lot. Keep the stitches out of the way. On the front side, go ahead and dampen the reinforcement piece to a light damp level. This will help when you're clamping the leather together. It'll help it stretch into shape. We're gonna use a PVA glue inside the stitch line here. Just get it nicely around that edge. That's the most important point. And around this belt loop too. While we're waiting for this to set a little bit before we press the leather together, this is the type of glue I use. It's called Rania Aquilum 315, free of solvents, water-based. What you do is you place it on the leather, you let it dry until it doesn't look white anymore, more or less. And then it's ready to be pressed onto the other side. Okay, now I'm gonna let that sit for around 2 hours to let the glue cure up, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna prep the rest of the holster for stitching. All right, after having let it dry for a couple hours, I'm going to go ahead and sand the edge so it has a nice flush edge to it. Again, you can use just a simple sandpaper, go over it really well. I'm gonna go ahead and use my drum sander and I'll be right back. I'm gonna mark the stitch line along this outer edge here. We already have the stitch line marked where we poke the holes along this line here. We also want to mark it around the belt loop. All right, I'm gonna take this over to the machine and stitch it up. Okay, begin the stitch line right about here. Make sure your thread's nice and taut when you start. When you get to this point, you can go over these stitches and we're going to come back and make another line parallel to the stitch line. Now we're going around the belt loop and then we're going to end the stitch right at the top. Going around the belt loop is a good idea because this is going to be a high wear area, so you don't want the leather separating too much, and it'll look a lot nicer when you're done. Okay, at this point, all we have to do is let the holster sit for around 12 hours to let the glue fully cure. If you'd like to dye your leather, now would be a great time to do that because then you can let it dry overnight. I'm gonna go ahead and skip that step because I will be hot wax dipping the leather and that turns it kind of this deep natural brown color. In the next video, I will be showing you how to wet form the holster so it fits your handgun perfectly. So I'll see you then.